You're listening to the Doctor Is In podcast. This is the show where you get the best tips, tricks, and nutritional hacks to help you and your family get healthier. You'll also hear what works and what doesn't work so you don't have to waste your time and money. All right, let's get started.
Hello, I'm Dr. Martin Jr.
And I'm Dr. Martin Sr.
And this is the Doctor Is In podcast, and this is episode 113. And since we're filming this episode in December of 2017, and, obviously we get a lot of questions about this every day, every week, about eating throughout the holidays. So we'll spend a fair amount of time on, some tips and some tricks that you can use to eat through the holidays so that you don't completely derail your health or your goals as you go into this busy holiday season.
Yeah, because we want you to enjoy it and not to feel guilty. We always say in the office that we give you a recipe for success, not for failure. We understand people have holidays, people go on a cruise, or people go an all-inclusive, and they want to eat, and we're going to give you some tips today on how to get through and not to shipwreck.
Yeah, obviously,
your goals.
One of the disclaimers that we always bring up when we talk about these things is that the whole point of prevention or eating better most of the time is so that you can do these types of things and not derail your health. However, if you're a diabetic or you're really insulin resistant, your body has no idea that it's a holiday. It's not going to just say, go ahead, I'll give you this one here. I won't go into
give you a mulligan.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So, we always, we would rather people choose to eat a certain way rather than be forced to eat a certain way. And so if you're one of the ones who are still able to choose, then these tips are fantastic. Again, if you're diabetic or really bad insulin resistant or you got a disease of some kind, then, we would definitely recommend not giving into the season, as difficult as that can be. Yeah. You always like to say, we got some Italian blood in us, so we fully understand baking and cooking and all those kind of things. So we're going to talk about some holiday tips, but before we do that, I just want to talk quickly, because you and I were talking off air about a study that we saw recently, and it had to do with proton pump inhibitors. Now, a proton pump inhibitor, just in case you're not aware, is something basically that is used for, heartburn would be the simplest way. Yeah, so the idea is that in order to control the hydrochloric acid in your stomach, this medication, this proton pump inhibitor, will actually turn off the mechanism by which you make acid. So you're not making hydrochloric acid, which is good because you're going to get rid of heartburn, but it's bad because there's a definite reason why you need that hydrochloric acid. So anyways, one of the things that we have highlighted in our newsletters and we've talked about over different podcasts is these things are not without consequences. You watch sports, I watch sports. I'm a big Habs fan. You're a big Habs fan. You're a big Steelers fan. I'm a big Bears fan, unfortunately. And one of the commercials that you see all the time when watching sports are heartburn medication, proton pump inhibitors, or Nexiums, and they love advertising because, we're the audience that would overeat. And
purple pill.
Yeah, and so the whole idea is, eat what you want and take this purple pill beforehand, and you don't suffer the consequences. And, of course, the only consequence you're not going to suffer is heartburn. It's not going to stop all the other consequences, but you're just not going to get – and, I've said this before, is that heartburn is basically – your body is yelling at you. It's screaming. It's trying to get your attention. It can't get it another way, so it's getting it by just screaming at you. Heartburn, just think of heartburn as your body is screaming at you.
The alarm's going off.
So we came across a study, first, I guess, some previous studies, right? We already know that long-term use of antacids or proton pump inhibitors, I guess we can explain the difference between an antacid and a proton pump inhibitor, because somebody asked us about that recently. An antacid is basically something you take that would basically suppress, calm, coat, soothe. So the acid is there, and you just pop a couple of antacids, and
usually calcium based, and
it just kind of like acts as a buffer, and it kind of just quenches that.
Rolaids and Tums.
So those are antacids, and then as we mentioned, proton pump inhibitors actually are a little different. They actually turn off the mechanism. Again, you need hydrochloric acid. And one of the things that we know is that it's actually not a lack of acid that's causing the problem. But before we get into that, let's just quickly talk about this other study. So we know already long-term use of antacids or proton pump inhibitors are really hard on the bones. I mean, it makes sense. A lot of the nutrients that your bones need to stay healthy come from the food that you eat. And if you're not breaking down that food properly, the bones pay a price.
And you need a furnace, right? You need that acid to be in the place that the only place you need to be acidic in the body is in that stomach, right? In the first part of the colon. And everything else you want to be alkaline. That acidity is there it's a furnace. It's just going to melt your food down into micro-size it so that your body can readily absorb it. You look at a lot of autoimmune issues, for example, a lot of the factors in leaky gut, and we always see leaky gut with autoimmune, but one of the big factors is this: they don't break their food down properly, right? The food comes in, I'm being simplistic, but almost like too big. It hasn't been broken down enough,
and that
now it
stresses
becomes an antigen, right?
out the think of what that does to the bowels. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's again, you'd absolutely need that hydrochloric acid. So when you're not even making it in the first place, or you're suppressing it or quenching it, that causes some big problems. So we know that we already know that it's hard on the bones. We know that there can be very hard on the brain as well for the very same reasons, right? Leads to gut inflammation or lack of nutrients. The brain needs that stuff. So, I mean, there's so many little effects that we already know about them. But however, another study that we found interesting is that they found that proton pump inhibitors actually increases the risk for kidney diseases. And this was the result from, it's actually a fairly big study. They looked at 290,000 patients, and they found that the proton pump inhibitors. So again, the thing that kind of irritates me about these is a lot of these are over the counter, right? Like they're just...
Well, that's what they did, isn't it, with what they did with Nexium?
Yeah, over the counter. So, and there's a kind of a stigma, right? Like if there's a kind of a stigma that, and effectively marketed in the sense that, hey, it's over the counter, it's safe. They wouldn't put something over the counter that can cause issues, so it's got to be pretty safe. And obviously, you don't need a doctor telling you how and when to take it, so it's got to be okay. And so they put a lot of these things over the counter, and as a result, heartburn is a big issue for people, right? And if they continue to eat the same foods that they're eating and they're just popping these things and they feel better, so they're not getting that heartburn, it's not waking them up at nighttime. A lot of times some people cough all the time because of, acid reflux in the throat, and it's causing all these issues. And, so people get in this habit of taking it, and then next thing you know, they've been taking it for a few years and their bones are getting weaker, brain's getting weaker.
Kidneys.
And now we know that it actually increases the risk of some kidney issues, right? So if you're a diabetic, think about that for a second, because one of the bad outcomes of diabetes is kidney. So now combine a diabetic with somebody who's taking Nexium. And a lot of times diabetics are taking antacids and Nexium because the types of foods that they were eating to give them diabetes.
Yeah, well, for sure. It's always a classic sign. When we give out the questionnaire as patients come to the office, or it's part of our questionnaire for when they do biomarker testing, is, are you suffering from heartburn or acid reflux, right? And the reason that we're asking that question is because we want people to realize that acid reflux, again, it's the alarm system, but it usually means that you're very insulin resistant.
Well, and that's what I was just going to ask you. The number one cause of heartburn in the average person is it's really a sign of insulin resistance. Yeah. Too many carbohydrates, crappy carbs, right?
And vegetable oils.
Yeah, crappy vegetable oils. We'll do an upcoming podcast on canola oil. Some interesting studies have come out. Short version, stay away from it.
Yeah.
However, pretty much everybody with heartburn, it goes away once they cut out that crappy processed carbs and add some digestive enzymes to their routine, right? It's amazing, goes away.
Yeah.
So anyways, that was a study that caught our attention that we wanted to share with you before we get into some holiday tips, because we get a lot of people asking us about heartburn, so we figured, take a couple minutes.
Yeah, listen, if you're taking it over to the counter or you're on a medication, we want to get to the source of it. We really
because that's
like
definitely a Band-Aid, right? That's definitely you're just covering up the problem. It ain't going away. It's just making it feel better. And as humans, if we're not being reminded of it.
And another thing is, if you are on an antacid, if you are on a proton pump inhibitor, anything at all, if you're getting acid reflux at all, you have to understand you are going to be deficient in B12. Because if you're taking anything to suppress your
that's
acidity,
a great point, because you need a healthy stomach to get B12. You need that intrinsic factor. Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah. So, which then usually means that, you can kind of go one step from there. Generally, people that are chronically on an antacid or a proton pump inhibitor, typically they don't feel good. They don't got good energy. And that can compound the problem in the brain. It goes on. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, that's so if you're on an antacid, you definitely should be taking a sublingual B12, right? I mean, there's no question about that. So, all right, let's talk about some of these holiday tips that we recommend to people over the holiday season. Again, these are tips for people that have that flexibility to do this, because these are not the same tips that we would give somebody if they've got diabetes or they're trying to reverse something. So, but again, let's talk about this. Probably the number one, really tip that we suggest over the holiday season, if you are not doing a form of intermittent fasting, the holiday season is the best time to do it.
Yeah.
Right? So you're
going out tonight, could you have a big meal, or the families?
Yeah, it's a feast together, or famine, right?
Hey,
it's a great concept.
Yeah.
It is, right? I mean, it's it's that real good idea. You're going to feast tonight, so you might as well famine leading up to that feast, right? As much as you can. So let's talk about that a little bit first, the idea why fasting can play such a great role in kind of keeping you going throughout the holiday season. So first of all, one of the therapeutic advantages that a form of fasting has is, we always talk a lot about insulin. We talk a lot about
insulin. Never heard of it.
Yeah. There are, it's funny because, we can pretty much just push play insulin, just, use insulin for the answer, right? For everything.
Like it's such a key. Well, look, it's a food hormone. So if you're going to eat,
well, and that's what my point I was going to bring up is that, insulin is a food hormone. And, okay, I guess there's one thing that we should probably clarify, because I know a lot of times we talk about, how an insulin is spiking and all that kind of stuff. And every time you eat, you're going to bring up your insulin. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, we are made, God made us with the idea that our insulin is going to go up after a meal. So we're not anti-insulin at all. The problem occurs when insulin is chronically elevated. It's not, we are meant to bring up our insulin after we eat. Insulin is a partitioning. It stores things. It moves things. So we need it. It's a vital, right? It's an important aspect of after we eat. The problem that people run into is when insulin is chronically elevated. One of the kind of lies, I hate to use the word lies, but one of the myths about nutrition, and I don't even really know where this came from.
Well, it started years ago. I know what you're going to say. So
yeah, exactly, about this concept of eating 6 times a day, right? And you got to keep that. I remember
keep the stove going.
Yeah, keep that metabolism stoked, right? You got to keep it burning, and so you eat all day. And the problem with that is, that's a recipe for insulin resistance, because one of the things needed to create insulin resistance is chronically elevated insulin is one of the factors, right? So if somebody's eating all day, they're kind of grazing all day. Their insulin is never taking a break. So that's a problem.
And that's a huge problem if you're trying to lose weight. Because I always love the graph that is part of our the serial killers and even the metabolic storm. I love that graph when you show it's ingenious because
well, yeah, and the idea being that within, and I mean, it really is an interesting it really is an interesting graph. But so I guess the point of, when you're eating, insulin's elevated, and if insulin's elevated all the time, then you're going to be taking that energy, you're going to be storing it at muscle, liver, and eventually into your fat cells, right? So that's the problem with chronically elevated insulin. So here you have, we in a society today where people think they got to eat all day, and so then this concept of fasting comes along and, people are like, yeah, you can't, you're going to starve yourself. Well, I don't think we have that issue here. And you got to give it to the food industry. They did a real good job of getting people's head. Hey, if you want to lose, this was big for a while ago. I don't hear it as much anymore. But if you want to lose weight, you got to eat more food.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
eat frequently.
Yeah, eat frequently, eat more food 6 times a day, smaller meals, and, boom, and you're going to lose weight.
If you're, you happen to play for the team that we like, the Montreal Canadiens, and you're 6'1" and
you're expending a lot of energy.
Yeah, 180, and you're in the gym and you're working out, you're playing ball, hockey, and you're working out like you're like a greyhound there. You're just lean, mean fighting machine. Well, you know what? You can eat a lot more frequently in those people.
Yeah. Whereas the average person listening to this podcast, and us included, really, we sit a lot in a day, right? And so we don't need that kind of constant. Plus, there's definitely a different physiological reaction that occurs to somebody who's insulin sensitive versus insulin resistant, right? There's a big difference. And there's also different things that happen after you exercise. You become way more insulin sensitive. You can handle things differently. But the point being this, insulin is a food hormone. And when you fast, you're not eating. So therefore, insulin is low, right? It's a great way to keep insulin levels low.
Yeah.
So when you fast, that's one of the ideas. Now, fasting also has, tremendous anti-aging effects. Yeah. So good for the cells.
Your growth hormone.
Helps your cells kind of clean out old cells. Yeah. It's just awesome.
Because, it's insulin. It's almost like spraying at the cells. And the cells it creates an inflammatory response in the body. And the idea with it is, like you're saying, if you're starting your day, let's say Christmas Day, or you're going to have a big party tonight, the Christmas parties or whatever, then the idea is if you can keep that insulin down for the vast majority of the day, and then you're going to have a big meal tonight. Like, you're not going to be able to avoid it, and we're not even telling you to avoid it.
So there are basically, when we talk about fasting, there's kind of 3 categories of fasting that we talk about. The first one being kind of this idea of intermittent fasting. So the idea is we talk about an eating window, right? So there's 24 hours in a day, and somebody who eats breakfast at 8 in the morning and stops eating at 8 at night, well, that's a 12-hour eating window. So that means that they're eating for about 12 hours in the day, and then they're fasting for 12 hours in the day at nighttime. Because they're sleeping. However, in North America, we tend to eat more hours in a day than we actually rest, which, again, causes a lot of digestive issues, but that's another episode in itself. However, so when we talk about shortening your eating window, imagine what happens now if a person maybe eats their first meal at 11 and stops eating at 6. Well, that's a 7-hour eating window, which means they're fasting for a lot longer than that, right? So the idea being, we like to see people fasting for, about 18 hours and eating for about 6 hours, or vice versa, right? 8 hours of eating.
That's ideal.
That's ideal, right? And then so that's kind of what we like to see. And when it comes to Christmas, so if for example, let's talk real practical here. So you're going to have a Christmas meal tonight, right? Like we know tomorrow night, for example, we're going to have a big Christmas meal. So what do? So you stop eating tonight, around 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, or whatever. And you try to fast for, 16, hours or so. You start eating around 12, or, eat lunch. If you can.
Yeah.
And, you try to eat not too much, and then because you're going to have a big meal, and that's one way of doing it, right? There's no question. So,
and it works because you're keeping your insulin down.
Yeah, you're keeping your insulin down all night, most of the morning.
Like, remember the scene of your fat being kept in your body, because as long as insulin is present in your bloodstream, you're not getting rid of fat.
That's a great point, right? When insulin is present, you are, there's a process in the body where you break down fat cells. So your fat cells are just basically stored energy, right? So what happens is, it's always a good thing when you're breaking down your own fat cells for energy. Yeah. However, in the presence, whenever insulin is present, that stops completely. one can't work with the other. So as soon as you start eating food and insulin is present, your body stops breaking down your own fat cells for energy, so you don't use it. And you end up using the energy, the food that you're eating. If you don't need it, you store it. And rather than burning fat, you're storing fat, right? Yeah. So one of the important reasons why you keep your insulin low when you're fasting is because basically you're tapping into your own fat cells for energy. So you're in a kind of a mild ketosis in a sense. You're burning fat for energy. So it's a great way. You know, it's an awesome thing. It's good for your brain. It's good for your digestive system. Mm-hmm. There's so many advantages to fasting. And a lot of people will fast the first half of the day. And we're talking holiday specifics here. So a lot of times people are going to eat a big meal at night. So they're going to skip breakfast. They're going to break their fast at lunchtime. So let's talk about when, for the holidays, this is not something that we generally, would recommend always for fasting. But let's talk about during the holidays. So you're going to have a big meal tonight. There's a few, or tomorrow night. There's a few things that we recommend when it comes to fasting. First of all, save your carbs, because you're going to, one of the things with Christmas feasting is always carbs, right? So you're going to get your carbs at the end of the day. Don't eat them earlier. So when you break your fast, this is what we recommend. We recommend a low fat, and people are like, what? Low fat? You guys are high fat people, but they're not. Let us explain ourselves for a second. We recommend protein. If you can break your fast with protein, as much protein as possible, hit your protein targets, because protein makes you feel full.
Yeah.
And it's great. It stimulates that muscle synthesis. It's important. One of the things that people don't do when they start feasting is they don't hit their protein. They fill up on carbs and
the mashed potatoes.
Yeah. So,
the bread, right?
If you're going to break your fast, try to get as much protein as possible.
Extra meat.
Keep your fat lowish, right? Because, at nighttime you're going to eat a lot of carbs. And the worst combination, no question, are carbs and fat. Yeah. You can't have a high carb, high fat diet. That is literally, if I was conducting an experiment and I wanted to make a rat fat quickly, so they call it an obesogenic chow or rat chow. So if I wanted to get a rat really fast for the purpose of a study, basically it's high carb, high fat, right? Because that's just it. What happens is you get a lot of carbs, so you get more energy than your body needs, and all that fat just goes right into storage. It's a terrible combination. Yeah. So a lot of the Christmas feasts are a combination of fat and carbs, right? And so that going in. So the last thing you want to do is go into a meal already with eating a lot of fat that day. So the best thing you can do would be, keep your fat low, have a lot of protein, drink a lot of water. Drinking a lot of water before eating is a great way not to eat as much when you're going to eat.
Yeah. People don't realize that, right? It really does help with a feeling of fullness. And a little trick that we love at the clinic is, if you can, and people don't often think of this, but you should actually have a coffee. Have a coffee with your meal. You can have one after too if you want.
Yeah, before, during, or after, especially before, during.
It really does help to lower insulin.
And why is that? Well, you just mentioned it, because it's a great way. It makes you a little bit more insulin sensitive, so you don't need to secrete as much of that after.
Someone has said that coffee is much like metformin. That metformin's a drug they give for diabetics, right? That often, literally in Canada, be millions of diabetics on metformin. But coffee acts like metformin because it really does help your insulin to work properly, right? So, again, it just lowers that, at the cellular level, lowers your resistance to insulin.
And if you want to add one more, super hack to all this, so we talk about fasting, eat less, break your fast with some protein, keep your carbs really low, keep your fat low, and if, drink some coffee, and then if you can, lift weights or do a high-intensity interval training before, empty out those glycogen, empty out those storage in your liver and your muscles, empty them out as much as possible so that when you do eat those carbs, it just goes back into the muscles, goes back into normal storage rather than excess. That is awesome. Not only will lifting weights before eating or, a high-intensity interval training type of routine, not only will it empty out your glycogen stores, it will also make you more insulin sensitive after, so you won't even need as much insulin. So the combination of a fast, protein, water, coffee, lifting weights or exercise before is probably the best
way to get through your holidays.
The best thing that you can do.
Yeah.
If you can combine all of that, that's awesome, right? If you can't, then definitely fasting is a great one. No question.
Yeah, and we like our insulin balance too. That helps. And, for just people asking, I give it to lots of patients that say,
high
hey,
DHA.
Man, take this. Yeah. High DHA is it's good healthy fat, right?
So anyways, that's generally what we would recommend to people, as kind of a tip to kind of get through the holiday season, to allow them to also enjoy themselves. Again, we're not anti-food. We're definitely not anti-food. So we just like to give people the best tips possible to get through. So I hope you found that enjoyable or practical and stuff that you can use. If you have any questions, you can email us at info@martinclinic.com. If you're not a newsletter subscriber, we would encourage you to go to our website, sign up for our newsletters. We give a lot of tips and stuff like that throughout the week, specifically to help you take the information out there and make it very practical so that you can use it. So again, thank you for listening. Have a great day.